Hello, 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 my friends, and welcome to what is officially the last episode of season one of The Shadow Side with Safrianna. I wanted to take an opportunity because season one was recorded and rolled out in such an interesting way. We'll just call it interesting. To come back around and do sort of a recap, summary, reflection episode, but also just talk about what I think we need to talk about next, right here, right now, which is building the world that we actually want to live in. Today, I really want to dive into how shadow work moves us into sacred activism. And again, just recap some of the glimmers that came out of season one. I had such fantastic guest conversations. I recorded a few solo episodes all around. Definitely my favorite season of a podcast I have ever recorded. Uh, some fantastic conversations, amazing topics, and really allowed me to be in my passion of talking about the tough stuff because we don't talk about the tough stuff enough. It's really come to my attention how little resilience and capacity our collective seems to have for looking at each other's suffering and injustice that we experience and being willing to do something about that. But then when I dig deeper, I see so much of that is because we aren't willing to do that work within ourselves because we are terrified to do anything other than be productive and be a part of the system as it stands. And it certainly is not a system most of us want to actually live in. So we need to build better. And just in case this is somehow your first time stumbling across me, I would just love to introduce myself. I'm Safrianna Luna, the Queer Spirit Guide. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor, a international best-selling author, a podcaster, speaker, and more on my business stuff later. We'll leave it at that for now. But, I just have really come into the path of being a druidic priestess. That is so much of the role that I am here to claim. And it's still a process of claiming that even now, of leading with that even now. But my druidry is certainly the most important piece of who I am and how I show up in the world. And this episode is no different as I look back over the course of the last year. Like I said, season one has had a interesting rollout. I recorded everything live on YouTube, and then it was almost a year later that I actually put the episodes out in an audio format on the podcast platforms. And so I've really looked back over the course of our last year plus a little and just seen how much we have gone through as a collective in this last year or so, and how much turmoil we've experienced, how much personally and locally and in our countries and our continents and our whole globe, just how much has been going on. And it's been a tremendous amount. So, this episode today is really my love letter to the journey that I've taken over the prior 20 episodes of the season and a rallying cry for what is to come next because we persist, we continue, we live to love another day. And so, how do we do that? How do we continue that? So, I want to just start by synthesizing everything that we have been through in season one, sort of the collective uncovering that has unfolded. What tools do we have now, and how do we begin to move on from seeing the shadows that we've pointed out into living the world that we actually want? And of course, season two is already underway. We're already recording. The first two episodes are already out in the live form. And we're still talking about the shadows. We're still unpacking the shit. And we are still not avoiding the hard things. But we need to come into this balance because as the collective rises to face the shadows that so many have ignored for so long, and of course, I'm thinking right now, some of the big things in our face continue to be war, genocide, human trafficking, pedophile rings, you name it, right? Like, it's all up in our faces. We have continued to see through media, through the ability to share online, through groups, through all of these things, how much shadow is coming to the surface, how many survivors are stepping forward, how many people are whistleblowing. Like, the stuff is coming up. And oh my gosh, it can be all consuming, my friends, to do nothing but look at the bullshit and to get overwhelmed with it. I personally have had such a hard time at times throughout this last year looking at everything with the Epstein files, for example. And as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, that has brought a lot to the surface for me. Uh, so, all of us who are survivors who have collectively survived the shadows that are coming to the surface now, we're like, thank goodness, please pay attention. And yet, we're still witnessing a large part of the world ignore these sorts of things or turn a blind eye or continue to do the atrocious thing. So, it can be very easy to get keyed up by that and totally focused on where the lack is and how we're not building the future we want. So I really want to invite the other hand, which is to celebrate what is working for us and celebrate who we are and celebrate the movement that we're making to help the world be a better place so that we can be in this both and. Because if we only stay in the shadow and the bullshit and everything that has been going wrong, we lose that hope. So that's, again, even though we're going to continue talking about the shadows and we're still going to keep dredging this stuff up, it is always with this invitation to be with the glimmers as well. So, all of this to say, we can't transform what we refuse to look at. And this season, we certainly looked. So, we have really named and uncovered some major shadows. I started season 1 talking about the shadows that we face, and I named the big ones out loud, which unfortunately are still many of the same ones that we have today: corporate greed, hyperconsumption, environmental disaster and climate crisis, the us versus them issue, and mentality that continues to keep us divided instead of actually getting into the root causes of why we're struggling as a species the way that we are. You know, that was the leap off point for this podcast. And I continue to shine the spotlight on what needs a spotlight shown on it. I had a great conversation with Dr. Matt Van Auken, and we talked about the profit driven healthcare system and how insurance companies end up making medical decisions that lead to provider burnout, and why so many of us are leaving the field, why so many of us have stopped taking insurance. This was really an omega shadow of a system that profits from keeping people sick. And so that is a systemic and collective shadow. Some other systemic and collective shadows we chatted about in season 1 is collective power and control. I dove deep into domestic abuse tactics and how that has been adopted somehow by the US government at scale. Media manipulation, economic control, targeting of marginalized communities. And of course, those of you who have survived abusive relationships recognize this playbook of power and control. But more and more people need to be aware of it. It's one of those shadows we're bringing to the surface. I talked about recognizing authoritarian control. I talked about specifically the BITE model, behavior, information, thought, and emotion control, that operates within families, churches, social groups, political systems, you name it. And basically in the BITE model, questioning authority is, they're trying to shut down you questioning authority. I'm here to remind you that questioning authority is healthy, not disrespectful. And if ever we lose the ability and the right to question authority, that's when we really need to open our eyes. Hi, good to see you here. Uh, the we talked about breaking the cycle of violence. I invited in my old employer, Hartley House, and Caroline and Natalie came on with me to talk about how it takes survivors an average of 7 times, 7 attempts to leave an abusive relationship. We explored all of the various categories of what this can look like: financial abuse, the honeymoon phase trap, and the power of actually saying to survivors, I believe you. That was such a powerful episode. And then This season has also looked at power structures and hierarchy at a different or from a different angle. We talked about hierarchy. I had Ike on, and we talked about how artificial hierarchies are human created constructs that do not exist in nature in the same way. They exist to divide and control, and how curiosity and unconditional love are what begin to break those down. Are you seeing a trend here, by the way, with season one? I had a great conversation with an Ayurvedic practitioner, Jess Marie, about the quick fix trap and how so many of us are chasing a really quick fix for the problems, quote unquote, that we perceive we have. And so we talked about how ancient healing wisdom gets commodified, ends up, back in consumer culture, the M&M effect of cherry picking the sweet parts in the mix while ignoring the whole system, and how because of quick fix culture, we really don't have deep practices that we have to handle difficulty. This goes back to our resilience as a collective, our ability to handle the tough stuff, the capacity. We don't when we're constantly chasing quick fixes. We dove even deeper into trauma cycles and personal shadows. I shared about the shadow of my father. This was probably my most personally vulnerable episode. I shared the story behind Daddy's Girl, my poetry book, and generational trauma, why I chose to break the silence, even when family members tried to stop me or didn't agree with me, and really got into how healing means choosing your truth over being loyal to dysfunction, which is a big, hard one to handle. I totally get it. Had a conversation with Coach Claudia Sam. We talked about the disempowered mind and the difference between spiritual bypassing and truly empowered action. If you've been following along with me for a while, you know I am so anti spiritual bypassing. In fact, getting ready to write the lessons for 2 of my episodes of the Elements of Success, which is a course that I teach. And we're really getting into spiritual bypassing there. But Claudia Sam and I talked about how taking responsibility for our responses rather than just reacting to external chaos is really the way through. And it was really a great episode about moving back into empowerment. Talked about dating and trauma with my friend Moran Daly and how unhealed trauma creates patterns in relationships that, lead out into us not living happy, fulfilled lives, unfortunately. Hypervigilance, how we talked a lot about how the term narcissist is unfortunately commonly misused. And then we also talked about why connection, not more walls, is our path forward. Great conversation with my friend Dolly Rivera about standing up to bullies. Dolly's just a powerhouse when it comes to empowerment and moving through that stuff. And we talked about how bullying is abuse, full stop, how it erodes self worth over time, and the patterns of accepting mistreatment that start so young in us. We also addressed how one supportive person can change a life. So you can be that one supportive person. My friend Johanna Lyman and I talked about what men really want and how men's deepest longing isn't sex, it is to be seen, heard, and truly known. We had kind of a different angle of the male loneliness epidemic and the toxic masculine movements and how these ultimately harm everyone, including men, of course. And so there was an invitation for us to look for compassion for the trauma underneath the behavior without excusing the harm. So, an invitation to find some balance with how we approach healing. So, again, this season really revealed that these same patterns of control, silencing, disempowerment end up operating at every level. They operate in our families, they operate in our relationships, in our institutions, in our governments, and naming these shadows is the first act of liberation. And that's ultimately what the shadow side is all about. It's not just about calling out the shadows, it is about liberating ourselves from them, moving beyond the limitations. So, we also talked about healing frameworks over this last season. We didn't just name the problems. We offered solutions, ideas, medicine, wisdom, all kinds of good stuff. Every guest, every episode brought some form of tools, and I want to continue to give that to you all. In my conversation with Karen Foote, we talked about spiritual awakening. how it's messy. And awakening is more often messy than it feels magical. It can break your relationships. It can feel like it's isolating you. And that ultimately, community is the lifeline, and doing your shadow work is not optional. Karen shared a very amazing, just incredible story about how she showed up in advocating for her trans daughter at a school board, and how that personal healing prepares us to stand up for the collective. And I know Karen's still out there doing great advocacy work. I talked about the power of self love versus neglect and how systems of oppression benefit from our depletion. Super important to remember, especially right now, as the system continues to try and extract from us, even harder in some cases. And I want to remind everyone that genuine self care is not a luxury. And I also read somewhere recently from a Black feminist about how rest is also not resistance, because rest is literally needed for survival. You can't survive if you're not getting rest. So, rest is not a luxury, rest is not laziness. Self care, taking care of ourselves, is basic survival. So, if someone does not respect your no, they don't deserve your yes. And that includes systems. And we really help the systems thrive when we neglect ourselves. So, power of self love is the way through. I had a great conversation with my friend Camille Saunders about the season of darkness. It was one of my only actual podcasts this past season about seasonal wisdom somehow. But, I'm always talking about seasons elsewhere. But we talked about how important it is to honor our natural rhythms instead of grinding through all the time. And just like that power of self love versus neglect episode explored, we explored here how rest is not laziness, it's winter. It is a necessary season for the body. We need hibernation for our body, mind, and spirit routinely. We need our little moments of winter, our moments of darkness through every season. And then we also got into leadership, identity, and intergenerational wisdom in season one. My friend Saris Villanueva and I had a conversation about intergenerational healing, how personal shadow work naturally evolves into activism and justice work. This is like the big, cool, juicy stuff for me, is how knowing ourselves deeply, how including our shadows, diving into our sticky places, loving all of ourselves is the foundation for collective liberation. When we can reclaim our own ancestral wisdom that colonialism has tried to erase, we really move the timeline forward in some amazing and powerful ways. With Aaron Anatabi, I discussed leading while different, and we really got into neurodiversity and how neurodiversity strengthens things. Every time we gather in a neurodiverse community, we are building something better, and building for the minority makes it better for the majority. It's just as simple as that. And so, our current and present attacks on diversity are really, we think, an extinction burst, the last desperate grab before these harmful systems really die away. And may it be so. May it be so. If you have not met Amy and Nancy Harrington of the Passionista Sisterhood yet, oh my gosh, please do. We had a conversation on creating inclusive community, and Amy and Nancy, I've had lots of great conversations with them. You can go back in my content on my channels, etc., and see blogs and videos with them. They are just incredible sisters who have built community. And so I had them on to talk about how they built such an inclusive community that also makes space to have hard conversations. And they said that really community built on the rule of kindness is where it all begins, that real inclusion sometimes means excluding those who cannot practice tolerance and kindness, and ultimately that rupture and repair is what creates genuine connection. And then, of course, I can't not talk about environmentalism. I talked about when Gaia suffers and how Earth Sense, our intuitive gift that some of us have, is really impactful for those who carry it, because environmental disasters land in the body. And I chatted about doom scrolling as an energy leak and not an act of care, with some ideas for acts of resistance, ceremony, and community care. And then, last but not least, we got into navigating the unknown, which is actually one of my very first episodes of the season. How we navigate uncertainty, especially in the face of all these shadows that keep cropping up. And that was with my dear friend, Dr. Melissa Bird, who I do so many amazing things with, who I host my seasonal shenanigans ritual series with. And in that conversation, we talked about how integrating the shadow and the light is essential for creating positive change, that we can't bypass our way through uncertainty, and we got to face it head on, even in the fear of the unknown. So, every single guest, every single topic of season 1 really offered a different doorway into what I think is an ultimate truth. Healing is not a solo act, and it's never finished. So the tools that we need to heal come from within our communities, from our ancestors, from our bodies, from our guides, from the earth herself, and of course from our higher self, from our inner self, from all parts of ourselves. But healing does not happen in isolation, and it is ongoing. And we are definitely seeing the throes of humanity right now. These systems beginning to really, really die back. So, what's next? Building the world that we want to build. We've recognized the shadows, and now we have to move continually towards creating sustainable change. Now that we see clearly, how do we actually act? How do we actually move forward without burning out? This is the bridge. This is the big question. And I think first, I just want to name the tension that's here. You're probably feeling like overloaded. How do we handle all of this stuff? How do we handle the shadows that we're facing as a collective right now? You may see the systems, you may see the trauma, the patterns, and feel overwhelmed. And how do you not collapse under the weight of knowing what you know? And this is the shadow of awareness itself. Seeing clearly can feel like a burden if we don't know what to do with it. So, first and foremost, you do not have to martyr, sacrifice, and burn yourself out. That is not the way to healing. That is perpetuating systems of harm. So, what is reactive activism versus regenerative activism? Regenerative is what we want to move towards. Reactive is where we've been stuck. And some reactive makes sense. I really want to caveat here with rage is survival. Real healthy anger is my boundaries are being violated. This isn't okay. Something needs to change. So, reactive activism is often fueled by rage, urgency, and adrenaline. It's hot, it's fast, and it can burn out. It is necessary, but it's also not sustainable. I mean, we see with these big protests that have happened in all around the world, but in the US over the last year or so, that have these big swells of people coming together, but then afterwards a lot of times the action has dropped. And I did see this coming up where more and more communities doing activism were recognizing exactly that. Like, oh, we rally in the moment and we come together and we say we're mad, and then what happens next? So that's where the sustainability comes in, and that's where regenerative activism comes in, because it is rooted in self-care, community care, and long-term vision. It asks, how do I keep showing up for the next 20 years, not just next 20 days, 2 weeks? How do I actually allow myself to keep showing up? So we saw some of this urgency and sustainability throughout season 1. Collective power and control. There's some urgency when we are actively being abused. And then other things that look more like sustainability in episodes like self-love and neglect, in the season of darkness, and when Gaia suffers. Again, we don't need to choose to look at the shadow in one way or do our activism in one way. Ideally, we weave in both, and we know which mode we're in and whether it's serving us. For you to be able to do what you need to do, you have to be compassionate for yourself. One of my core teachings is that compassion does not equal enabling, and compassion has to start first for yourself. So it's not compassionate for me to burn myself out in the name of work, because I can't continue to serve if I burn myself out because I'm grinding too hard at work. But it is compassionate to be able to serve other people and help them do what they need to do and get where they need to go and learn what they need to learn. So for me to be able to be compassionate to other people and show up in the work that I do, I have to be compassionate to myself and take care of myself first. And this weaves into how the individual healing moves into collective liberation. As we as individuals take care of ourselves, we choose to be regenerative to ourselves as much as we can. And various levels of privilege make it harder to take care of ourselves. Lack of privilege makes it very hard for us to take care of ourselves. So, individual healing is collective liberation, doing what you can do for yourself to take care of yourself, to not murder yourself, to not self sacrifice, to not be codependent, to not shrink and be in people pleasing dynamics, to move away from the cycle of harm, is also moving the collective away from that too. I know so many of you out there are probably black sheeps in your family, or the one who got scapegoated, the one who got gaslit, the one who got tore down for speaking up against the trauma, the generational wounds, for pointing out what wasn't working. And I just want you to know, whatever little bit of healing that you have the capacity to do, it does help. And not to be in healing mode all the time. So these are some of the big, practical things. I don't want you to be in healing all the time. That's not how we build a better world. We don't do 24/7 self-development on ourselves when the system is broken to try and fix the system. We work on what we really need to work on to be the happy, healthy people that we can be. We're not supposed to be happy all the time, but that satisfied in the life feeling that we all deeply deserve, I believe we can get there. And that is not by trying to fix everything ourselves or in ourselves. It's by moving at a sustainable pace, weaving in and out of work and rest and expression and play and dreaming and doing, not all action all the time. But I just want to continue to highlight how every single guest this season really demonstrated that individual healing as collective liberation. I mean, just thinking about how Karen's spiritual awakening led to school board advocacy and a huge ripple effect in her community, how Saris's grief journey led to community-based art and justice work in her world, how Erin's autism diagnosis reshaped how she led and how she did business, how Johanna went through this personal exploration of masculine energy, and it fueled her empowerment coaching and brought in this whole new world for her. So your shadow work is important, and it's not a selfish thing, and it's also a necessary thing. Actually, it is preparation, because you can't pour from an empty vessel. You can't lead others through shadows that you have not actually faced yourself. You cannot have the capacity to really assist if you are running away from the shadows. The shadow light dance. We have to hold both to really be able to do what we're here to do. And I really believe that this is the biggest difference between sacred activism, sustainable activism, and more performative activism. It is the inner work. It's the quality of how we are approaching the systems within ourselves, whether that be the patriarchy, whether it be making no room for victims and justice because it's uncomfortable for us, whether it be that abandonment wound we've never faced ourselves that makes us abandon communities and not be able to show up in connection and mutual aid. Literally, it is the difference of our inner work that allows us to connect outside. And if we are just coming into activism on the surface level, if we're just trying to build a better world for ourselves without actually confronting why we need a better world, we're not bringing that out into the collective to help others heal. So, all of this to say, I want you to walk away with hope, with opportunity, with inspiration, because the ownership work, the collective work, the shadow healing, the acknowledging the uncomfortable things, it's big. It's uncomfortable. It's not what we want to have to do. And so it's easy to try to run away from or avoid it. But you can't change what you can't see. You can't liberate out of what you're ignoring. And the more that we look at these things within ourselves, we take that sacred ownership, we do the activism of inner work, we have the capacity to come out and assist others, others that want our help, others in literally protecting them with our assets, our energy, time, money, etc., because we have the means to do so while they are still attempting to be liberated. None of us are free until all of us are free, right? So that is really, I think, important for us to remember. But I want to really give you some practical, like, walk away things to consider as we're building a better world. One, guard your energy like it's sacred, because it is. You don't have to give your energy away. You don't have to sacrifice. You don't have to murder. Your energy is a sacred resource, and you ideally get to determine where those resources go. When you're in survival mode, I get it. It can be nigh on impossible. But however you can preserve and guard your energy, please do. Build your support systems before a crisis. Don't wait until you're drowning to try and reach out, right? That's really, really hard to establish support systems when we're already drained, already in crisis. So if you're already feeling like you're in crisis and you don't have community, the time is now. The best time to plant a tree is now. But if you are feeling a little like you have the capacity, now's the time to go look. And honor your seasons. You don't have to be on year round. You are meant to take breaks. You are meant to have rest layered into your days. And so, wherever you can reclaim more of that seasonal wisdom in your day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year living, it will support you in continuing to build a better world. The more that we reject artificial summer as the norm, the better off we're going to be. Question hierarchy. Question every system you participate in, including the ones inside your own head. Find your people. And by finding your people, I mean the people who can embrace your shadow and your light, your people who can make space for all facets of you and who can give you all facets of them in return. Not all the time, not 24/7, right? And with permission and with consent conversations, but find your people who can hold you and you can hold them. Practice pleasure and joy as resistance, not reward. That's a big thing. We want to really lean into the knowing that pleasure and joy are a birthright. And as systems try to take that away from us, we want to lean in even harder. And joy is, I mean, is that not one of the greatest purposes of life? Is to experience joy? It's not, again, a 24/7 state. That's not the goal. But to be able to really experience it when it arises certainly is. And I just want to put that reminder out there to please remember that one person believing in a child can change everything. One person believing in you matters. So if you can be that voice of support for a child, if you can advocate for somebody, if you can advocate for yourself, for the child who didn't get that advocacy when you were younger, if you can believe that inner child, all of that matters. We really want to continue to build communities that care, that can sustain long-term change. Kindness is the non-negotiable foundation of that. And people who cannot practice kindness with us hopefully will weed themselves out. But we're allowed to have our sacred boundaries and walk away too. Might take some tries, but know that you can. Lean on our ancestors whenever we can. Our ancestral rooted approaches that honor where we came from in the past while we're building towards liberation is something that I think it feels out of reach for many of us because the sort of good ancestral stuff feels so far away at this point. But we all lived in communion with the earth at one point in time. And let's be reminded of that and lean back in. Remember that we get to build systems back better. We get to keep advocating for the marginalized, because when things are made better for the marginalized, they are also made better for the majority. We might need to rebuild or build new things outside of broken systems. Sometimes reform is not always possible, but we do know that the communities and the spaces that last are the ones that are built on authenticity, repair, and shared commitments, not perfection, not control, not needing one narrative, none of that, but actual authenticity and communal willingness to come together. So find these spaces, build these spaces, do your inner liberatory work so that you can show up in these ways and do what's yours to do. It's a lot. It's a lot of responsibility being human and having this thing called a self, because we are responsible for ourselves. We are the only one that can save us. There's no one outside of us coming to save us. There's no leader, politician, spiritual figure, guru, none of it. And so if there's one way to make the world a better a better place, it is to stop chasing quick fixes and external metrics of having landed or become an authority or knowing that we've got it right because someone else said we've got it right. Like, we've got to break out of hierarchy. That's really what it is, I think, at the end of the day, is breaking out of hierarchy. So see your neighbor as a neighbor. See people as equals. I think we all struggle with this sometimes because we have a thing called an ego. But if you find yourself judging someone, if you find yourself angry at a particular group of people or whatever that might look like, what's happening within yourself that you get to look at, that you get to examine? Because what is that inviting you to see within yourself? The shadows aren't something to fear. They're like portals, this portal into our inner world to see what's ours to work with. And so I think this entire season has been proof of that. If you've been following along, I know you're not the same person that you were 20 episodes ago. If you've been on this journey with me this last year, you have seen things you cannot unsee. And I know it's heavy. And I also know there's beautiful gifts in here when we're willing to look. So ultimately, I just want you to know you're not alone, that every person that I've had on as a guest, every listener, myself, we are all doing our own shadow work as a part of this growing collective that's choosing to live in a different way. And that's the ultimate hope I want you to leave with. You're not alone in wanting to build a better way. You are not alone in looking out and seeing the shadows and going like, shit, that's not okay. You are not alone. I'm never going to be here to offer quick fixes. I've never been. But I am here to remind you that the world we actually want is possible. And I believe, I know, building it starts with exactly the work that we've been doing together, exactly the conversations we've been having, exactly the work that we are doing right here, right now. So I can't wait to continue the journey in season 2, to keep going deeper, to revisit some of these topics, to look at them from new angles, and to continue to do the liberatory work of moving from these unconscious collective shadows into conscious collective shadows so we can consciously liberate individually and collectively all of these things one at a time until the world that we really want is here. As always, I just want to remind you that I am here if you need me. You can check out my website at any point in time, safrianna.com, to learn what I'm up to learn more about opportunities to work with me, get more freebies, join communities, all that stuff. And if nothing else, I really hope you will carry some of the things from these conversations forward, that you will be more willing to talk about the shadows around the dinner table or with your friends or in your communities, and continue to do the work of pointing out what we need to move beyond as a species, as a planet. That's the work. So, thank you, my friends, for walking in the shadows with me this season. I really believe the darkness is not so scary when we face it together. So, until next time, my friends, I'm Safrianna Luna. Bye for now.